Okay, cool. Today I am going to I'm going to talk about what will hopefully be one of the more joyous experiences in Ethereum in a fairly short time, which is being a Casper validator. So who here knows what a Casper validator is? Who here wants to be a Casper validator? Cool. So for those who don't, Casper is a proof-of-stake algorithm, and a validator is someone who has a pile of ETH and deposits it into a smart contract and runs a node that basically signs coins with the same key that controls that ETH in order to participate in Ethereum's consensus algorithm, keep the network running, and in exchange you get rewards if you do your job correctly, or you could get penalized if you do your job badly. So, being a Casper validator. So step one is choose your validation code. Now, generally in most kind of cryptocurrency protocols, including proof-of-stake algorithms, you talk about like every participant in the system having a private key and having a public key, right? So a public key is kind of like an identifier that you can just freely give out to anyone. And when you sign up for the system, you have to provide your public key. The private key is a corresponding secret value that you can use to sign messages. So all of these proof-of-stake protocols tends to have to do with some notion of like some set of actors, where each of these actors is identified by the system by their public key, and if they want to participate on behalf of their identity, so a participant needs to sign a message with their private key, and anything signed with their private key can be verified against their public key, right? Now, validation code is basically a generalization of this, right? So, like, one of the goals that I'm really trying to accomplish with the design proposals for Casper and sharding is to make it so that the Ethereum protocol has no inherent built-in security assumptions other than information theory and hash algorithms. And so, having any single specific built-in signature algorithm would kind of go against that goal. Right? So the idea here is instead of specifying your public key, you literally specify a piece of code which will then be used to verify any signatures that you sign. So when you deposit, you basically come up with an arbitrary validation function, which will then be used by the algorithm, where every time you submit a vote, the algorithm will take your vote and it will just basically submit the hash of the vote and the signature into the code that you provide, and it will use that in order to verify that the signature is correct. So this validation code can be anything. So the simplest thing now it does have some restrictions, right? So first of all, it has to be a piece of EVM code. Second, and as input, it expects a 32-byte hash of the message plus the signature. Gas limit, fixed gas limit 200,000, and the code must be a pure function. So what this means is that the code is not allowed to look at any kind of internal state of your account. It's not allowed to modify any information. It's not allowed to read any blockchain state. Basically, if the code runs with some particular input in one context and it gets some output, it has to get that exact same output for that same input in every other context. And the reason why this is important is basically because we want validators to be kind of held to account for their votes, right? So if, for example, you as a validator make two votes that are during the same epoch and that vote for two conflicting blocks, so if you basically try to quote equivocate, vote for two conflicting things at once, then someone can take those two votes and include them as a transaction going to the Casper contract, and this basically penalizes you and takes away some large portion of your deposit. So we do not want people to be able to engage in like weird trickery to make their votes validate in one context and not validate in the other context, which is why basically your validation code has to be a pure function. Good news. Almost everything that you care about is a pure function. So elliptic curve verification, this is what people use already. So that could be a piece of validation code. So an elliptic curve verifier that specifies one particular public key, that is something that you could use as validation code. If you're really concerned about the NSA having a quantum computer and you want quantum resistant signatures, Well, you can just make a piece of validation code that verifies some quantum-resistant hash-ladder signature. I've written a proof of concept of this already last year. You could even do multi-sig MFNEC recover. So you could specify 5 elliptic curve public keys. And the validation code could check that you have signatures for any 3 of them. And now you can stake with a 3 out of 5 system. Threshold signatures, BLS threshold signatures. This lets you do bigger multi-sigs, possibly 50 out of 100, 500 out of 1,000. Keys that can authorize other keys, this could be useful. So you have a lot of kind of freedom in how you choose your validation code. Now, the good news is, though, is that in practice, you personally as a user probably don't need to worry about which validation code you're using, right? You as a user basically just click a button that says deposit, and basically the client will just automatically figure out what validation code you want to use. It'll generate a key for you, and it'll send a transaction which actually deposits your Ether into the Casper contract, right? So the other thing that you have to choose when depositing is you also have to choose your withdrawal address. So the idea here basically is that, let's say, for example, that you have most of your ETH in a cold wallet, and you want to start staking with that ETH. With your cold wallet, you would sign one transaction, which does a deposit. This transaction would then have a piece of validation code, and the validation code would verify signatures that are signed by some hot wallet. So some private key that's like more readily accessible online. Then, whenever you want to log out, whenever you're done validating, the ETH can only go to one address, which is the withdrawal address you specify. And so if you want, you can specify your withdrawal address to also be your cold wallet. And so if someone hacks your hot wallet key, they can't steal the money for themselves, right? The only thing that they can do is they can cause you to misbehave, in which case you get penalized some amount, and that's it. The rest of your money still just goes right back to your cold wallet. So basically, when you deposit, you have to specify your validation code, specify your withdrawal address. Your client will generally just do all of this magic for you, send a deposit transaction. The deposit transaction gets included in the Ethereum blockchain, and there you go, right? Step 3, deposit. You get inducted as a validator in 2 dynasties, which is basically about 45 minutes. Once you have sent your deposit transaction, once you've waited this like approximately 45 minutes, you are now staking. Yay! Well, don't clap yet, because up until this point, you haven't contributed 1 bit to the security of the network. Now you start. So step 4, stay online, right? Basically, the Casper FFG consensus is split up into a series of periods that we call epochs. Every epoch lasts 50 blocks, which is about 20 minutes. And every new epoch, the Casper FFG protocol gives you the ability to send one transaction. And this transaction basically votes for some particular checkpoint. And a checkpoint is basically a block that occurs at the start of an epoch. Right, so every 50 blocks, a validator will have the ability to send a vote which votes for one particular checkpoint. And that vote has some other numbers attached to it, but generally, you as a regular user don't really need to care that much, right? From your point of view as a regular user, you will just need to keep your node online, keep your node running, and your node will just do all of this voting automatically, right? So stay online. Who here knows how to keep a computer connected to the internet? Welcome to being a Casper validator. Yeah, so just make sure your node stays on and connected, and every time your node downloads new blocks and it detects that a new epoch has started and that it's ready to vote, your node will automatically send a vote message. And it'll just keep on doing this 24/7. Yay, you are now contributing to the security of the Ethereum network. So Remember, the Casper finality gadget is, at least in the hybrid version, it's not a full consensus algorithm. It is basically this kind of overlay process that lives on top of the existing proof of work chain. And the purpose of the Casper FFG finality gadget is that it tries to finalize blocks that are already created as part of the proof of work chain. So if you have a checkpoint, so a checkpoint is basically every block where the block number ends in 00 or 50, right? Simple enough. If 2/3 of the validators vote for some checkpoint, then that checkpoint is justified. If 2 checkpoints in a row get justified, that checkpoint is called finalized. Why does this actually contribute to this concept of security? Why does this contribute to economic finality? If you want to learn more, go read the Casper FFG paper on arXiv. Anyone here read the paper already? Excellent. More people should read it, or like more people should give feedback. Okay. So basically, like, this is the process that you're participating in, right? You're participating in this process as trying to justify checkpoints and then finalize, and you're giving them additional security. So rewards and penalties. This all has the important caveat that these are numbers as of Danny Ryan's EIP from 1 week ago, so they are absolutely not finalized. And people on our ETH Trader should absolutely not make posts on the front page that say, oh my god, this is gospel, Vitalik has announced the official Casper rewards. Who here was thinking of doing that? Okay. I mean, realistically, we'll probably just have to like have a carbon vote or something. I don't even know. So this, according to Danny Ryan's tentative, very tentative EIP, if you stay online and vote, under optimal conditions, if 10 million Ether is deposited, you will get rewards that are proportional to the amount of Ether that's already deposited, and you'll get the equivalent of an interest that's somewhere between 0 and 5% a year. Probably more, probably closer to 5 than to 0. If you go offline, then if you're just permanently offline, then you will normally lose 5 to 10% per year. If everyone else is offline, then generally it'll be closer to 5 to 7% a year. So what this means is that if you are online more than somewhere between half to 2/3 of the time, generally you will be making money on that. So yes, it is safe to validate if you just have a laptop. Unless you're like me and you just like travel 24/7 and you can't even count on your laptop being connected to the internet. Now, in extreme circumstances, you can lose more, right? So if you are, and I'll talk about the quadratic leak mechanism soon. Now, the third bad thing, the second bad thing that you can do is if you are malicious, then you might end up making 2 conflicting votes. You might end up like basically doing what Byzantine fault tolerance theorists call being Byzantine, right? So basically what that means is you make 2 conflicting votes, you just do stuff that just obviously violates the rules of the protocol, and if you do that, then you get penalized. And basically, if you get caught doing something bad even once, you get immediately logged out, and you lose between 1 and 100% of your deposit, depending on conditions. Generally, it's closer to 1%. If you're doing this as part of a successful attack, then it's closer to 100%. Who here wants to successfully attack the Casper finality gadget? You can do this at the low, low price of 1.67 million Ether, which I believe is somewhere north of $1 billion. I don't know, just to like manipulate a hard fork election on Reddit or something. That's probably cheaper. So, did you know validator returns are proportional to the inverse square root of the total deposits? So basically, if the total amount of Ether participating in Casper goes up by 2%, then every individual validator's interest rates go down by 1%. So that would mean like going down from 5% to 4.95%, or going down from 4% to 3.96%. And the total issuance goes up by 1%, right? So basically, if more people deposit, then every validator earns slightly less, but not like too much less, right? It's not a perfect kind of zero-sum competition the way proof of work is. So if, for example, only 2.5 million Ether is participating, then you as a validator will be able to make up to 10% annual returns. If 20 million Ether is participating, then, or let's say if 40 million Ether is participating, you as a validator will be able to make, someone shout out the answer already. At 10 million Ether, it's 5% annual returns. What is it at 40 million Ether? Yay, 2.5. Someone knows how to do square roots. Joy. If you want to learn how to do square roots, you can use like Newton's algorithm, and it's implemented in 2 lines of Viper in the Casper contract. Go read it. Okay, so collective rewards and penalties. This is one of the fundamental principles of Casper. Your rewards do not just depend on your own behavior. They also depend on everyone else's behavior. And the point of this is to basically disincentivize large pools or cartels or large coalitions from acting in ways that shut other people out. So if you vote, then your reward goes up from 0 to 5%, basically linearly as a percentage of all the other validators that vote. If you do not vote, then you get penalized, but you get penalized even more if many other people also don't vote. Everyone roughly get that? So here's an interesting property of this. If everyone else is behaving perfectly, then you need to be online half the time in order to be profitable on net. If 2/3 of validators are online and voting profitably, then in order to be you have to be online 2/3 of the time to be profitable on net. And so basically guess what percentage of validators need to be online in order to justify or finalize a checkpoint? 2/3. So there's like actual thinking here. So quadratic leak. So this is the kind of extra incentivization feature. So basically, if a huge number of people go offline, and if this many people go offline, then really it's either World War III or it's a deliberate attack. And World War III kind of is a deliberate attack, though it's a deliberate attack on the internet, not on Ethereum, but oh well. So in very extreme cases, if more than 1/3 of validators go offline, blocks are going to stop finalizing. And the way that the blockchain starts finalizing again is basically that the deposits of everyone who is not finalizing, or sorry, of everyone who is not voting, start leaking. And basically the deposits start decreasing. And the reason why it's called a quadratic leak is that the portion of your balance that you lose is at least initially quadratic in the amount of time that you don't vote. So, or in the amount of time that everyone doesn't vote. So basically, at least initially, people lose their deposits very slowly, but then as the blockchain stops finalizing for a longer period of time, well, after 1 week, everyone who doesn't vote will have lost somewhere between around 5% of their deposits. After 2 weeks, it'll be something around 20%. In 3 weeks, it'll hit 50%. And the losses will keep on growing until the portion of validators that are voting just naturally grow to 2/3 of the total, and then the blockchain starts finalizing again. So this mechanism serves kind of a double duty. First, it creates kind of a recovery against these extreme scenarios, and second, it makes sure that everyone responsible for the extreme scenario gets pretty heavily penalized. What if you get slashed? Who here has seen this weird robot before? Okay, then you probably read the Slasher blog post on the Ethereum blog from about 4.5 years ago. Basically, no, the reason why I named it Slasher is because the Ethereum proof of work algorithm was called Dagger, and it was called Dagger because like DAG, D-A-G, directed acyclic graph, and the algorithm is based on directed acyclic graphs. But then I figured if we're doing like knife references, then we might as well call the proof of stake algorithm Slasher. So anyway, basically, what if you get slashed, right? So what does getting slashed mean? In general, you get slashed for submitting 2 votes that contradict each other. You get slashed, so your deposit gets cut down, right? Your deposit gets slashed down for basically doing 2 things that conflict each other. For performing an action which is just like obviously evil and contrary to protocol goals. Now, there are two slashing conditions that define the precise cases under which this happens. And they're called no double vote and no surround. But basically, like, you can't vote twice in a single epoch, and you can't make a later vote which references an earlier source and an earlier vote. Think of this as you can't contradict yourself, right? Both of these things just say you cannot contradict yourself. Now, if you're just peacefully running a node, then, well, fine, you're peacefully running, you're just peacefully running a node, and then you're not going to do any of this because, why would you do any of this? In order to do any of this, you would basically have to hack your node to make it do this. Now, that said, there are potentially reasons why this could happen to you even if you are innocent, right? And there's basically two reasons. One is that your computer disk gets corrupted, causing you to just forget that you already did something and then try to do it again. Most of the time, this is not, now, the Casper nodes are designed to be, maximally safe and atomic, and they basically, record in the database first and then broadcast a message and so forth. But, like, realistically, there is always a tiny probability of, like, weird cosmic ray stuff happening, right? Now, second, your node gets hacked. And third, your VPS provider gets hacked if you decide to stake on a VPS. So, like, this is a risk, right? So if if a hostile actor takes control of your staking key, they can make you lose money. But they cannot make you lose all your money except in extreme cases. So partial slashing to the rescue. So if you get slashed, two things happen to you. First of all, you get forcibly logged out immediately. So you can no longer participate in the consensus. Second, you suffer collective penalties as though you're a non-voting validator for the next 4 months, right? So if 10 million ether is depositing, then this will be a minimum of about 2% of your ether. But, this is variable, and if you get slashed and then suddenly a whole bunch of people go offline and the leak starts, then, well, your deposit gets leaked too, right? And then the second is you suffer a penalty of 3p times your deposit, where p is the portion of other validators that get slashed within 4 months of you. So if you get slashed, and around the same time, 1% of other validators get slashed, you lose 2% plus 3%. If you get slashed at the same time as 10% of other validators get slashed, then you lose 2% plus 30%. Yes. So basically, unless you're really, really unlucky and you get hacked at the exact same time as an actual attack, or you get hacked at the same time as somehow everyone else gets hacked, you're basically, if your node gets corrupted or hacked or like bad things happen, generally you're not going to lose that much money. So, did you know? This is one of the really interesting properties of the partial slashing mechanism, and this is how it's kind of intended to explicitly incentivize decentralization. So basically, the main principle of this is, right, that if you just look at the chart, right, if A and B both don't get slashed, then both, let's say A and B both are both, like something like 3.3% of all deposits. If neither of them gets slashed, then obviously neither of them lose any money. If A gets slashed, A loses 12%. If B gets slashed, B loses 12%. If both of them get slashed, then both of them lose 22%. So the partial slashing mechanism incentivizes validators not just to be secure, but also to set up their security in such a way that their failure modes basically happen in this case and not in this case. It incentivizes validators to set themselves up so that their failure modes are maximally discorrelated from everyone else's failure modes. If you have to fail, you're much better off if you fail alone than if you fail along with a whole bunch of other people. What's the point of this? First of all, this is a disincentive against participating in the largest staking pool. Second, it's a disincentive against using the same VPS as everyone else. Third, it's a disincentive against using the same operating system as everyone else. It's a disincentive against even using, or sorry, this should be the same implementation as everyone else, right? So, and another thing that it does is it basically says that validators that have more money basically have to spend more on, and care more about their own security. So, that's partial slashing. Who here is looking forward to hopefully not getting partially slashed? Excellent. So step 5, log out. Let's say that you are tired of validating and you want to, I don't know, sell all of your Ether and buy Tron. So who here wants to sell all of their Ether and buy Tron? Okay, so basically what you do is you enter your online key. So basically either your online key or your withdrawal key. So either one of the two keys can initiate a logout procedure. So either your withdrawal address or the same key that you use for signing, the same mechanism that passes the validation code, can be used to initiate withdrawal. This logs you out after 700 dynasties. Now, what is a dynasty? A dynasty is basically the Casper term for a validator set, right? So the dynasty counts or increments every time the validator set changes. So generally, if everything is going well, dynasties change every epoch. So 700 dynasties basically means 700 dynasties multiplied by about 20 minutes, which is about, about 14,000 minutes, which is a bit more than a week. Actually, yeah. Now, wait, hold on, sorry. I actually messed that up. An epoch is a bit over 10 minutes. 20 minutes is the amount of time, or 25 minutes is 2 epochs, which is the amount of time you have to wait for finality. So 700 dynasties, each dynasty will be something like maybe 700 seconds. So that gets you to about 500,000 seconds, which just happens to be close to a week. Now, once you're logged off, you have to wait for another 4 months. And after those 4 months, you'll be able to recover your funds. Why 4 months? Well, because within those 4 months, if before you committed any kind of equivocation, any kind of slashing violation, anything bad, then the evidence can be included in the chain, and that can penalize you. So, step 5, basically, you wait for a week and then you log out. Now, notice, by the way, that there are exceptional cases where logging out is going to take longer, right? So in that particular case where you log out at the same time as a whole bunch of validators are offline or the chain is under attack, logging out may take much longer than a week, right? So the reason why that's being included is basically so that logging off is not a way to escape your responsibility to protect your blockchain if there is an attack. If an attack has started, well, too bad. You have to stay on longer and protect it. This is part of the responsibility of being a validator and what you get to be paid interest rates for. Who here likes responsibility? Who here likes getting interest? Unfortunately, you can't have one without the other. Who here learned that from their mom? You people have terrible parents. Now, keep in mind, the Casper staking minimum is currently 1,500 Ether, and the reason why it's 1,500 Ether is because in the current non-scalable version of Casper, basically, the Casper blockchain has to be keeping track of all of these votes, and so there's a limit to the number of validators that it can support. Now, in the long run with sharding, the current expected minimum balance is, for a validator, is 32 ETH. So with sharding, the blockchain is more scalable and the consensus will also be more scalable, and so these minimums go down. Now, if you do not have 1,500 ETH, then you can join a staking pool. And staking pools have different properties, right? So some staking pools are more reliable than others. Some will be larger than others, but as I mentioned, larger is more dangerous. Deposit and withdraw conditions, so under what circumstances can you deposit money? How can you withdraw? Does the staking pool float in ERC20? Are your participation shares stuck? Is it a centralized pool? Is it a decentralized pool? So a decentralized staking pool could, for example, have a validation code which is a threshold signature between its participants. There's a bunch of options. You will also soon be able to stake in the soon with a trademark, so that's more than 2 weeks. You'll be able to stake in the experimental sharding system. And in the experimental sharding system, deposit minimums are likely to be much lower, so you'll also be able to stake there. Great. And thank you, and wish you all a happy, joyful validating experience. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We have lunch now. Just some announcements for the silver and gold member sponsors. Please stop by the front desk to get your tickets to vote for the prize-winning demos to come. So silver and gold member sponsors, please go to the front to pick up your tickets.